Where do you fall on the spectrum in music? Are you the person who knows everything, right? You know all the music theory, you know about the augmented six chords, you know about the Phrygian, you know about the diminished, or are you the guy that's like, hey, I just play the thing. I don't need to know the notes. Maybe you play guitar. Yes, you probably play guitar if you fall in that second list, but that's not what we're talking about today. What we are talking about is knowing more about music making you worse? I'm Robert Monroe, and I love music theory, and I happen to feel like I know quite a bit about music. I went to school for music. I played music all my life. I love learning new tidbits about music theory, how people think about music, different ideas, all that type of stuff. But I do want to address some of the shortcomings that come from an overly heady intellectual approach from music. So the first one is a pretty obvious one. You probably heard this before. Makes you think instead of feel. And if you play with a lot of jazz cats, you may have run into this yourself, where you're playing with somebody and they're playing a solo and you notice it doesn't ever really land. Why doesn't it land? Probably because they're thinking about the modes and they're going through and they're playing all the right notes and they're going to the ninths and the color notes because that's what you're supposed to do, and they're, forming the phrases to going to the downbeat, all these things that they're supposed to do. All those things are technically good, but if you listen to people who are at their prime, who are the number one top A jazz musicians, like Charlie Parker, like Herbie Hancock, like Miles Davis, guess what? They all do. They break all those rules. They play a lot of ones. They play a lot of square phrases. Why? Because it feels good. So not everything has to be this weird intellectual counterintuitive nonsense. It can actually be stuff that's grounded. So you kind of need a little bit of both, which we'll build upon later, but let's keep going on. That's point number one. Makes you think instead of feel. Point number two. Sometimes it's actually harder to communicate to others without patronizing them. I have run into this actually quite frequently. This may be the worst part about knowing a ton about music theory especially. It turns into this thing where you have to talk down to people before you can even have a conversation about how to play. You're playing Sweet Home Alabama and you have to explain, well, actually. No, who gives a rip about well, actually? Have them think about Sweet Home Alabama the way they're thinking about it. You think about it the way you're thinking about it. And if you play together and it sounds good, guess what? You did the thing. Mission accomplished. That's all you needed. This doesn't have to be the case, but often it really is. And it really becomes this thing that people use to bully other musicians who may even be better than them into a feeling of self-importance. Now, here's another one. Sometimes people will overanalyze instead of necessarily practicing. This is probably a little maybe less common, but you definitely do run into it. People who understand a lot about music, and they'll even come up with reasonings and basically excuses on why they can't do certain things, or oh, that's impossible, or oh, I should approach it like this. And it's mostly because they know a whole lot more than their hands actually can do. And in reality, they just need to shut up and actually practice. That's really what we need to do. There really is some truth to the Nike motto, just do it, when it comes to music making. In many ways, you're going to be far better off in music spending a lot of time just playing your instrument than thinking about it a lot. Now, I'm going to say though, there are a lot of advantages to thinking about music. The more tools you know, the better you're going to be. If you don't know about eyes closed, chunking, the way our brain stores information, memorization techniques, music theory to organize the song, form styles so that you can also think about which section you're in, the different genre-specific ideas and things. All of this can really lead to making music so much easier. Especially, think about something like music reading. It requires a great deal of information and understanding to be able to do. But if you have music reading, I can walk into certain gigs and not spend a single minute in preparation because of how easy it is to play with people if everyone knows how to read. Another thing is, even though I mentioned that sometimes it's harder to communicate because you know more, it actually most of the time should be easier to communicate, especially if you're not so pedantic about it. If you're not thinking there's only one right way to talk and think about music, it can really open up things because you're allowed to converse with people where they're at with their music making. I personally think ultimately a balance is going to be the best approach. Lead with what you like. So if you don't really like thinking about music theory, don't start there. Start from an intuitive feeling place and then move into music theory when you have comfort, when you're around people that you're comfortable with, and learn that way. If on the other hand, you're super heady, super intellectual, you're like playing jazz, you're thinking through all the modes, you write out every chord change when you play classical music, that's wonderful. Start there, but then be okay with putting that aside, closing the book, just playing, feeling, listening. That's really what it comes down to. If you are not focusing on the goal, which I like the way that this guy Schoenberg, a couple hundred years ago would say it. He said the goal is the phrase. And that's kind of a fancy way of saying something that is a beautiful line of music. That's what you're really trying to achieve. If you're not making a beautiful line of music, all of the rest of that stuff is meaningless. In many ways, in a modern pop context, you can almost say you're not playing your part. If you're not playing your part, what are you doing? I hope this was helpful. I should make another one almost on the opposite side of things, but you tell me, are you guilty of this? Do you think too much when you play? Let me know in the comments below, and until next time, you have a great day.